All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We'll just wait just another moment and then we'll get going. Folks are trickling in. All right, and while folks are trickling in, I'm just going to go ahead and get us started. So we will, I wanted to do some housekeeping. The session is being recorded, so we will send that link out once it's available to all the attendees and to all the registrants. And then that is also available for others who weren't able to join us today. And my name is Melissa Sokolowski. I'm a senior project manager with the Smart Buildings Center, a project of the Northwest Energy Efficiency Council. And today we're bringing you really exciting and relevant content on existing building commissioning in K-12 schools. Of course, commissioning goes by many names and terms, and we'll get into that shortly, kind of break those things down. First, I want to go ahead and give a big shout out to our sponsor, Puget Sound Energy, for helping to put on this webinar today. And this is a series we've been doing to promote energy efficiency, help folks in various sectors understand what kind of incentives are available to them, break down barriers to initiatives like commissioning that can be so valuable. And just a brief note about our organization, the Northwest Energy Efficiency Council. Our mission is to promote energy efficiency, policies, programs, and technologies that not only create jobs, but also foster economic growth and environmental improvement. And of course, our big project is the Smart Buildings Center. We're a nonprofit education program. We do networking events and educational events, trainings, classes, webinars such as this one, demonstrations of new technologies or strategies, and also our tool lending library. We have a diagnostic and monitoring tool lending library, over 85 tool types. You can reserve tools online. We can be flexible with the loan period. You can pick up locally here in Seattle at the Pacific Tower, or we can ship anywhere within the state of Washington or Oregon. And the best part about that is that it's free. So check out our website, smartbuildingscenter.org, and click on the tool library tab. You'll also see a lot of helpful resources, tutorial videos, etc. And our flagship program is the Building Operator Certification. I myself am a proud BOC grad, really helped to jumpstart my career in facility management. And I'm sure that we have at least a few BOC grads on the call today. We are really working to meet the challenge of the evolving workforce, recognizing the continuing trend towards sensor-based building system automation and providing operators with skill sets accordingly, with not only mechanical and technical skills, but data analysis and communication skills. And third-party analysis shows that certified building operators in the Pacific Northwest can save their organizations up to about $20,000 annually. So it's well worth, many times over, cost of enrollment. And so without further ado, we will get into our content for today. And I have some really great panelists with us today. I've got folks from the service side of things, as well as the K-12 school district side of things. So I would first like to introduce Jeremy Bromley from Keithley Barber Associates, principal and project manager and senior commissioning professional. And I will take a step back for a second and just explain I missed one of my housekeeping items. We will hear from our 4 panelists today with a brief presentation from each, from their kind of niche in the commissioning world related to K-12 schools. And then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. So if you have questions and would like to address those, we will have an opportunity toward the latter portion of this session. So please go ahead and jot those in our Q&A field, and we will address those best that we can with our panelists. All right, now I'll go ahead and give Jeremy Bromley the floor. He's going to give us an overview of what commissioning means and the various terms that we hear thrown around related to commissioning, and we'll have a better understanding of that process. Take it away, Jeremy.
All right, thanks. Do you mind if I steal the screen? I did do a couple last minute edits before I got on.
Sure, no problem. Let's see here. I'll just go ahead and you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, can you see it? There we go.
Yep, you're good.
All right. My name's Jeremy Bromley. As she said, I'm one of the owners at Keithley Barber Associates. KB has been providing commissioning engineering consulting services for over 20 years throughout the US and internationally. I personally have been a commissioning agent with them for the last 13 years, with 5 years of control experience prior to that. And I've been asked to give you kind of a brief overview of existing building commissioning programs. So what we're going to go through is basically what is commissioning, existing building commissioning, what is it? We'll go through the existing building commissioning process, talk a little bit about monitor-based commissioning, ongoing commissioning, and then how to get the most out of your commissioning dollar. So what is commissioning? So existing building commissioning, exactly. So per the Building Commissioning Association, it is a systematic process for planning, assessing, investigating, analyzing, improving, optimizing, and verifying the performance of building systems and assemblies. So when a contractor says we commissioned that air handler when we did startup, they did startup, they didn't do commissioning. It's a little bit different. So then we get into what the different types of existing building commissioning there are. There's basically 2 in here, right? So we've got retro commissioning and recommissioning, and they work basically the same exact way. The only difference is retro commissioning is done on a building that's never been commissioned before. Recommissioning is done on buildings that have been commissioned in the past. Some of the questions we tend to get is, how do you know your building is a good candidate? So basically, if you answer yes to any of the following questions, your building is a good candidate for a retro commissioning process. Has your building never been commissioned? Are you finding increased energy costs? Building systems are not operating properly. There's been renovations or expansions since last time we did commissioning. The change of use of the space, increased complaints for hot and cold calls. And another one of the big ones has been over 5 years since the last time your building was commissioned. So then you get into the benefits. We've all heard the benefits of this, right? Lower utility bills, extended equipment life, improved operation, detailed list of improvements. Gives you a pretty good map for future capital projects, and it logs building conditions and deficiencies for you. So the process, it's basically through the PSE grant program, it's basically a 4-stage process. And the first one that we get into is the planning phase. Right, that's where you define the goals and the objectives. You conduct cursory walks of the buildings to determine current building facility requirements, and then you develop the commissioning plan and determine the initial team. Once that's all figured out, then you run into the investigation phase. That's where you actually review documentation, analyze utility data, interview occupants and facility staff, perform site walks, look at the building automation system, test some systems, and in that time, you're going to develop that initial assessment report, which identifies and estimates kind of simple payback for issues that we discover during that phase. The investigation phase then goes into the implementation phase. That's where you guys as the owner will go and hire the contractors to resolve the issues that you want to have fixed. Once the issues are resolved, then the commissioning person will come back and verify that those changes were made and that everything works properly. Then we run into the handoff phase where you update documentation. We come out and train staff and end users on changes that we made, why we made them, to where hopefully they don't just kind of override all the stuff we just fixed for you. Then we'll develop a persistence plan or an ongoing commissioning plan, and we close out the project. One thing to know here is that we know that you guys are overworked and understaffed. Don't really worry too much about that, because 95% of the heavy lifting on these existing building projects should be done by the commissioning agent, not by you guys. So then the next question we get is, what's the estimated cost, right? So when you look it up, they say estimated cost of 50 cents to $1 per square foot, but really the biggest variable in cost is the building / project size and the system complexity. They can easily go over the $1 a square foot, depending on how deep you want to get into a building. But typically you're looking at about a 2-year payback on those. So then monitoring-based commissioning, that's somewhat new and not everybody knows a whole lot about it. So basically monitoring-based commissioning is a software solution to provide actionable information, which utilizing just your existing control system. The software on the market now is pretty good at identifying issues based on rules that are set up by you guys, the owner. But they don't identify like new optimization strategies, right? Initially, I personally wasn't a fan of the monitoring-based commissioning, but the more I learn about it, the more I kind of actually like the software and think that it's a pretty useful tool if it's implemented properly. So some of the benefits you get out of doing the monitoring-based commissioning is all pretty much the same stuff you're going to get from the existing commissioning, except for the last two there, the free up facilities personnel and the fault detection. To me, those are the two biggest ones for you guys, right? So the software itself acts as a first kind of a full-time optimization person that's just slowing the degradation of the building's energy use. And it frees up facility staff to actually be able to go out and focus on repairing those items that the software is discovering. So that way you guys can get ahead of issues. There are some pitfalls or some things you really need to be looked at with monitoring-based commissioning, right? Buy-in, you have to have 100% buy-in or it's just not going to work. That's pretty much the same for every commissioning process, right? Limited data. At times you're going to find the BAS system does not have all the required data points that you want to adequately monitor a specific system. So such as sometimes they'll have a lot of virtual points in the code, such as timers, loop outputs, and stuff like that they shift around that aren't really readily available for you to grab. So you may have to do some adjustments to the DDC to get everything you need. Too much, too fast. Placing an entire building on a monitoring software can result in way too many recommendations for issue resolutions, basically creating another alarm fatigue issue. So go slow on older buildings. So just add in a system or add in a wing or an area, and that'll be better. Software is only as good as the person programming it. So a bad programmer will result in bad results. So we recommend testing all rules to ensure they're functioning properly before you actually implement them. And then finally, it's not hands-free. So monitoring-based commissioning does require personnel to monitor the system, make changes to rules as they come up, add rules, remove rules, act on issues found, and make recommendations for future buildings to be monitored, and potentially some software upgrades. Now, the cost on this one, when you search for it and look at it, it says about $1 per square foot, but the reality is the cost can range widely depending on the software that you choose. So there's some software out there that uses a lot of canned rules, which are a lot easier to implement and deploy in a building. But there are some systems that are a little bit more customizable, and as more customizable, the more time is needed to set it up, and the increased implementation costs for programming and testing those systems. But the expectation is about a 2.5-year payback on monitoring-based commissioning. So then when you get into the last one here of ongoing commissioning, right? Ongoing commissioning is effectively just retro commissioning done repeatedly. So planning, investigation, implementation, and instead of handing the building over, we monitor and then we start the next plan, do the next investigation, and do the next implementation. So this is just an ongoing process to continually look for ways to reduce your energy usage. And then you get the getting the most out of your commissioning dollar. So to me, for new construction or existing buildings, I believe the best practice is a kind of a multi-pronged approach, right? Using all the tools we talked about, from monitoring software and establishing an ongoing commissioning plan. Establishing a robust commissioning program can be complicated and pretty time consuming. So first and foremost, I'd say hire an independent commissioning agent to develop that plan for you, obviously with your input. Then the commissioning agent should be working hand in hand with the local utility to determine what grant monies may be available to offset the costs of those different commissioning approaches. And you may be able to utilize grants to complete some capital projects that get identified through there as well. So my ultimate vision for a successful program with minimal requirements for an owner would be for the commissioning agent to effectively kind of run the program for you with input, obviously from you on guidance on specific goals and budgets. But that would allow the commissioning agent to work directly with and give direction to like BAS programmers and mechanical contractors to resolve issues that get discovered and to make sure things don't fall through the cracks. Because one of the things we see is like when I'm out on a job site, I see many times a control contractor shows up to the site for their required weekly visit. And if not given specific tasks, we'll just kind of poke around on a system, making changes that may or may not need to be done, or worse, creating issues as they're not thinking about how those changes affect the rest of the building. Conversely, if there's a mechanical issue that needs to be resolved to clear alarms from the screen, many times that information isn't passed on to the mechanical contractor. So that results in a persistence of issues on an expansion of the alarm list. So getting those two entities to work together on a common goal, which is your goal, I believe would be invaluable in the long term. So yeah, thanks for listening. I know it was a lot of information really fast, and I could probably spend another hour talking about this just because there's so much to it. But yeah, that's what we got. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I wonder if well, I'll share my screen and go back to your last slide because I want to just look at that for a second. While I'm pulling that up, there was a question that came up, and we're going to save most of the questions for the Q&A period, but I do want to address this now. Is there a difference between the duration required for retro commissioning versus recommissioning? Can you speak to that, Jeremy?
I'm not sure what exactly that they're asking there.
I think they're asking, is there a difference between commissioning a building that has already been commissioned at construction or so retro commissioning that building versus recommissioning that building versus retro commissioning a building that has never actually been commissioned? Is there a difference in the overall time duration for those processes? And Marina answered and said that she's not aware of any difference, and that seems correct to me, that it's basically the same process, right?
Yeah, the processes are basically the same. It's just how deep do you want to go into it? Do you want to go back through the building from top to bottom, every piece, every component like you would in a new construction, or do you want to kind of sample some stuff and do more of a, average all your temp sensors in a building to say, hey, they're all at about 72, they're all within about 5 degrees, those are great, let's move to the next thing. So you can kind of shorten it a little bit, but yeah, commissioning and existing building commissioner, they kind of run hand in hand.
Okay, great, thank you. And I just want to look real quick at this previous slide. And you're seeing my slides now, just the slide, is that true? You see in my presenter view?
I am, yeah.
Okay, here we go. How about now?
Yeah, I do.
Good. Okay, I just want to look at this little graph you have here because I think it's important to point out that we have this baseline cost, right? That's running as usual as you are now. And then we look at this periodic existing building commissioning. Great, you got some savings. I just want to point out these little spikes here. So, you know, you will reduce your costs over time, right? Or reduce your costs. You do a commissioning process, and then those costs will slowly start to creep up again, right? And then
Exactly. Yeah. So I was running short on time, so I didn't want to get into it. I wanted to kind of fit within my 10 my
yeah,
little 10-minute
you.
thing there. But basically what that graph is showing is that if you never recommission your building or relook at your system, your baseline costs are just going to increase over time, right? That's just an inevitability. And with periodic existing building commissioning, you'll find that your utilities spike, you go through, you do some retro commissioning, and that cost will drop, and then it'll creep back up and it'll drop. And then the whole idea is to get into an ongoing commissioning pattern where just over time, you're constantly looking for ways to reduce that cost to where you don't have those spikes in utilities. You actually are looking to continually drop that cost for the life of the building, not hit big spikes of, you know, cost.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate your digging into that a little bit more. And okay, so next I want to go ahead and introduce Marina Tenay, who is the Capital Projects and Facilities Manager for Sumner Bonnie Lake School District here in Washington. Marina also recently served as the president of WAMOA, the Washington Association of Maintenance and Operations Administrators. It's kind of a mouthful. Lots of experience, has been doing really great things in her district. And so really excited to hear, Marina, from you about your hands-on in the field experience with not only initiating some commissioning, retro commissioning processes in your schools, but how you overcome those funding and staffing barriers, which are so common. You know, as Jeremy kind of showed, the benefits to commissioning are apparent and often a very favorable payback, and we'll look at some more examples of that. But you know, how do you overcome some of the challenges that K-12 schools have in outlaying that initial upfront cost in the first place, with the funding structures that exist, having to go through bonds and levies, really having to plan ahead and make a case for those kinds of projects. So I'll turn that over to you, Marina, and I'll get here to your first slide. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here today. Yesterday, someone asked our team what our approach was, our team, it's a small team, towards energy efficiency measures and implementations in districts. And the word that I came up with was opportunistic. I mean, really, I've learned that you leverage every possible opportunity, even if it's not presented in the way you think it might be to begin with. For instance, with the ESSER 2 funding, superintendent called me up and said, do we have any like indoor air quality projects that we need to do that we could do with ESSER funds? And immediately my mind went to, what am I going to get the most bang for my buck from that will affect a broad variety of buildings and advance our goals for those buildings? And so recommissioning or retro commissioning was definitely the first thing that was in my mind. With that, I mean, I have a very deep understanding of my buildings. And so I quickly put together a list and compared it with our director of maintenance and our HVAC team to identify a limited number of buildings where we knew we had issues, whether it was in controls or equipment or high EUIs, or, you know, that needed to be investigated and that go beyond what the tech's ability to do is on a daily basis. I was also hopeful that in this process, that I could show its value so that we could continue to use it as a tool and really get the stakeholders in the district to have the same investment in recommissioning that I have. So our goals, as I said, are recommissioning the buildings with the higher EUIs, known issues. Really wanted to do tab at a couple of buildings just to really make sure that our airflow was doing what we thought it was doing, because we were continuing to get airflow complaints during COVID. Repair and resolve, and then also looking at some of our buildings that were older and not in the cycle to go through modernization or replacement through SCAP funding, and see what was happening in those buildings from an HVAC perspective, and preparing ourselves to be poised to take action if funding opportunities came up to do that work. Also grants and the control upgrades. So separately from our recommissioning project, we did move to a different server for one system and upgrade the graphics on another system. But the big project was our partnership with McKinstry and taking a good deep look into our buildings. Oh, thank you. If you could go to the next slide, Melissa.
Yeah, and so I think I'm finally showing the correct
Perfect.
view, right?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
So that first round of projects had a nice big handful of buildings, and we had a whole lot of issues that were identified, and number of issues identified in testing and balancing. And I have to say that doing that first round sold the team. Our HVAC team, who was very skeptical, yeah, you know the word I mean. They were not sure of the process, became firm believers when they saw the work orders that were generated. When you see that the issues that we're identifying are real issues that have real impact on performance of equipment, on airflow in the classrooms, and on the experience of occupants, it's hard to deny the value of this process. So we worked with our partners to resolve all the control issues from that round and to do as much work in-house as we could to save money. And we were able then to add additional buildings. And, you know, when I say I'm opportunistic, I'm really opportunistic. Emerald Hills in that second round is a building that's not very old, but even before it opened, all I heard were complaints from our HVAC team about the control system, about the construction, about the whole process. And so for me, this recommissioning of that building in particular offered an opportunity to make sure that the work that was done, that the design, it was a new system for us that we don't have anywhere else in the building from an HVAC perspective. You know, we wanted to make sure that we answered all the questions and put everything on the right path for going forward. And also to bring its performance into alignment with what we had anticipated in design. So definitely opportunistic approach to looking at these. And again, we have identified a large number of items to be corrected, both on the mechanical and on the commission or the controls side. Unfortunately, we've lost 2 out of 3 of our HVAC team, so doing the work in-house is going to be a little more difficult going forward, but we will figure that piece out. If you could go to the next slide, that would be great. I'm not going to go too deep into the kinds of things that we found and the specifics of the work, because Scott Henderson has been working on the second round of commissioning in our buildings. And so he has a very intimate knowledge of what's going on and the work that he's doing with his team. But I will say that, you know, being able to capitalize on this ESSER II funding to do this work, it has, you know, helped us achieve these outcomes. Even though this project is still in process, we're not completed, we still are seeing that we are improving our performance in our buildings. We're supporting that by setting up systems to audit set points and schedules so that we can maintain the the improved performance that we're setting up right now. We've also, I hate reading from lists, so I'm not going to read from the list, but I'm going to say that I feel like even though we're not done yet, we have gone great strides to achieve these outcomes. And this work has made believers of people in the district. I presented to our school board last night about this process and what we've done in this project, and they're very supportive, not understanding commissioning at all at the start of the presentation. I think now they understand the value, and that the stakeholders in our district will certainly consider this in the future, especially as we're moving forward over time. We want to keep persistence of performance over time, that this is a process that you put in place and maintain that can really serve you well. I guess the only other thing that I would say as a takeaway is every grant that comes down the pike is something that I look at through the eye of whether commissioning is something that fits right within it. In the past, we have done commissioning at targeted buildings that are not part of this list as part of ESCO projects when there have been Department of Commerce grants. So, wherever you can be creative and think of how commissioning might fit in helping you achieve your goal for a building, it really does have an incredible payback, in my opinion, for the costs that you're investing in it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Marina. I think that's a really good point about, helping to really needing buy-in from your school board, from any financial decision makers, and having a champion such as yourself really kind of push that through, educating those that need educating on the value, etc. So, and I wanted to also just, if you could give us, for those of us who don't, those of the attendees who don't know what ESSER is, could you give us a really quick summary of what the ESSER funds are? I know we have folks from outside of Washington on the call.
Okay, I couldn't really break down what ESSER stands for. However, It is COVID-related funds that were, and there were 3 rounds. First round was very focused on PPE and frontline response. I think the second round really expanded and allowed us to use more money towards projects like an indoor air quality project. We actually did qualify for ESSER 3 funding, which was larger than what we received in ESSER 2. And so we did a whole building with replacing building controls and replacing the chiller, and then focusing on chillers in another school at one of our high schools that were in poor shape. So we've been able to spread a little love into some other places. We're also going to be using ESSER 3 funds to replace heat pumps in 2 facilities that we just wouldn't have found funding to do any other way. So we've been able to put some good money from these federal funds into projects that will have a huge benefit on staff and students in indoor air quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got Marco. Thank you, Marco, letting us know here that stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. So ESSER. That's the acronym.
It rolls off the tongue.
Yes. Thanks, Marco. So this is coming down from the Federal Department of Education. So no matter where you are, you have probably had access to some of these funds, and I appreciate you highlighting that you were able to recognize that you had this funding opportunity. You had the ability, you had the foresight to see how this commissioning process could contribute to increased air quality. And then you were able to leverage those funds to do a few projects, show some good returns on those projects, utilize some savings by doing some of those repairs in-house, and then reinvest that back into doing more projects. So I think it makes a good case for also maybe starting small. I think Jeremy mentioned something about, start with a small system, a small wing of your building, or one building. Get a successful project in there to show the value. That makes the case for, being able to continue and expand that program, just as you were able to show the value with your school board, Marina. So really helpful information there. Thanks for sharing. And I'm gonna just go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Scott, who Marina mentioned, has been working with the Sumner Bonnie Lake School District on these commissioning initiatives. And so I want to just go ahead and turn the time over to Scott Henderson, who is the lead commissioning engineer for McKinstry. And he'll be talking about that process in Sumner Bonnie Lake, and then also giving us some other information, other case studies. So take it away, Scott. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Apologize if you hear any noise in the background. I intended to jump in a conference room, but I was supporting some field people and ran right up against our start time. I don't want to spend a lot of time on slides like this. I know Jeremy covered this. So again, this is the existing building commissioning process. We went a little more granular. It's the same thing. We did just break out verification and training a bit more. We can move to the next one, please. I did just want to pull this in. However, I think this is nice information. This is a rundown of the 5 measure types that we generally find in existing building commissioning, and basically what their impact is typically off to the right there. So scheduling basically is equipment is running all night long. It's running on the weekend. It's running on a holiday. All times you don't need to have occupied comfort level temperatures. That uses a lot more energy. Operations and control are more about issues you might have with equipment obeying the sequence, or some other difficulty. You might have a programmatic change where you're using a space for longer or for different uses. There might be issues like you have a morning warm-up sequence that for some reason is now inactive. And of course, morning warm-up is intended to establish comfort conditions by scheduled occupancy. You typically want to see that run for a half an hour, an hour. Advanced resets, that's talking about things like outdoor air temperature based resets, like that's pretty common on boilers or chillers. You may also do resets based on demand. Actually, McKinstry, we're big fans of that. That's basically if you have a certain percentage of heating or cooling valves calling for heating or cooling, that your central plant responds accordingly. Set point modifications are typically things we look at, like for instance, most of your condensing boilers these days are running at about 120 degrees. Sometimes we see them set much higher. Sometimes there's an operational reason they're not getting to temperature. That's something that we'll dig into. By getting to temperature, I mean we're not getting spaces comfortable for some reason. So we may look at a variety of things to tweak set points to make them more appropriate. We also see at times things get corrupted or overridden, or a workaround was left in place. Similar to the idea of maybe I'm using a space later into the evening. So I said, well, maybe my unoccupied temperature should be, go ahead and be 70 instead of 55. If we see things like that, we put them back, of course, after consulting with the owner. And sequence of operations modifications, those are things like, for instance, going from a purely advanced or purely from a reset strategy to a demand-based strategy, or reactivating something or implementing something like a morning warm-up, just to name a few. Next slide, please. Again, this is a little bit of a repeat over Jeremy, so I'm not going to go into too much depth on this. These are the top 5 reasons from our perspective. I just wanted to, and actually we can move on from this. I think the next slide. Yeah. I want to wait for this to populate. Oh, okay. So this is a lot of the reasons, or a lot of things that we see facility operators presented with, that existing building commissioning can really give them a helping hand. Just the first bullet there, lack of data for facilities and infrastructure. You can click it again. All those, yeah, thank you. All those are really good reasons. Whoops, please go back. All those are really good, well, I wouldn't say good reasons, but those are definitely challenges and hurdles that can lead to a lot of operational difficulties or whatnot. And existing building commission can definitely fill some of these gaps. I think pretty much everybody on this call has encountered this laundry list of items. Again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. This will all be in the presentation for you. So can you move on to the next one, please? This one, I just wanted to kind of run through these. I talked to my account executive, not being a sales guy, thinking about, well, what are the different reasons why we would want to get a PSE grant? And a lot of people think, well, this is just going to be about energy efficiency. And that is a really great reason, and it's a huge driver, but there are actually many others. If your buildings aren't comfortable, if they're too hot or too cold, indoor air quality is what IAQ is standing for. That can be a lot of different things. Generally, people say it feels stuffy. That's usually because you have either elevated CO2 or you don't have enough ventilation, which actually those are hand-in-hand issues. There could also be things like odors. You could have outdoor air source, excuse me, that's either pulling from something like a boiler or near a boiler stack rather, or near a generator. Those can lead to odors and other problems. Pressurization, what does that mean? Well, if your building's too positive, you can't shut your doors. That was an issue we actually ran into in one of Marina's buildings. It can also be running at a negative pressure where you don't want that causes other problems. That brings in outdoor air that isn't conditioned and gives you other challenges. Having too much pressurization in addition to causing problems with door closing is you're pushing your conditioned air out into the environment. That's a loss of energy. You're also using probably more fan energy than you need, et cetera, et cetera. And the controls confusion. That can definitely lead to a lot of problems. Either operators don't understand how the sequence is supposed to work, when things are supposed to come on or off, or again, a workaround was put into place for a really good reason and everybody forgot about it. And then there's some of these other ones, you know, that's a lot of work or hassle to get under environment, but it actually is, we find PSE is an awesome partner. They're very flexible. And we've become really adept at working with them and their programs. So that's a really great partnership that you can take advantage of. Just moving, you know, building on that with this next bullet, PSE is definitely, we found, is flexible. They understand their programs really well. They know how to implement them to your advantage. It is effective, we find, to lower EUI. And then long-term considerations, of course, and I'll get to this a little bit more later, is how do we keep these savings in place? You know, we've done all these corrective actions. How do we make sure that they stay put, both in terms of saving you money directly, but also if you have a grant, you're going to need to demonstrate that to PSC. And then continuing support, how do we do that? And again, I'll get into more of that later on. Next one, please. So yeah, I don't want to spend too much of our time here in the presentation. This will be again available to you, but these are 10 additional reasons why you might want to do EBCX in addition to the ones I've already highlighted. You can move on, please. This I really liked, and I stole from another presentation I had and pulled this in. This is from Lawrence Livermore Labs, actually Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And it gives you kind of a breakdown, their analysis of the kinds of energy and cost savings that you typically see from an existing building commissioning effort. And again, just a great infographic. Moving on, next one, please. And these are just different ways that you can monitor persistence. As I said, we'd get back to. We have a variety of tools that McKinstry uses, for instance, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I was told this was kind of salesy, so I don't want to necessarily introduce that. I just wanted to show you that these are different kinds of tools that we can, an existing building commissioning provider can implement on your behalf to keep those savings in place. Next slide, please. And again, this is what some of this stuff might look like as you see it in a dashboard. Very useful analytics. It's right up there. There are different ways to present all this by different providers, but pretty similar content. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit about how you actually implement EBCX in the wild, so to speak, or out in the real world. Right now, as Marina also discussed, we're engaged in recommissioning, doing existing building commissioning on 10 buildings in their fleet. We anticipated between 6 and 13% energy savings per building. Some of those are 6 to 8, some of those are 13 to 16 even, or excuse me, yeah, 13 to 16, I believe. But overall, that's kind of where they land. And again, as Marina said, this is a follow-on from ESSER work we've done with them. This project's is already including controls optimization. We're finding mechanical issues, things like that. That's repairs, upgrades, and just operations efficiencies. That alludes to all the things I was talking about earlier as far as schedule set points and sequences. Next slide, please. I apologize, this is a bit wordy. So one of our goals in doing this whole project is to basically identify and correct building issues to supplement what Marina staff is doing. And right now we're in the investigation phase. We had 2 primary strategies we used, and these are worked out with Marina and her team. The light approach was generally, we went in there and we either on site or from a remote access, we reviewed their controls. We looked for, do we have appropriate set points? Are there schedule issues? Is there weird behavior, anomalous behavior, I call it? That could be anything like, I have a heat pump, it's supposed to be in heating. Why isn't the reversing valve coming on? Why aren't we getting a compressor activate? Let's go take a deeper look to, like I say, just those other kinds of issues. Places, or excuse me, areas in the building are too hot or too cold, so on and so forth. Deep dive actually includes the light approach. That's generally our initial strategy to kind of target us when we get into a building. And then we went into a pretty in-depth, what we call a level 1 assessment of equipment. We're looking at, anything from filters to air leaks to, do valves open and close fully, to do dampers respond as we expect, kind of a point-to-point as you were, in addition to looking at what's the general condition of the equipment, basic functionality, which is really kind of what the second phrase, sequence testing, is about. Those kind of go together. We'll do a little bit of pushing it through its sequence of operations. Is it coming online? Are things turning on and off as we expect them as we're entering into occupancy or going into an unoccupancy? Basic things like that. We also take the advantage of when we're in the building to talk to custodial staff and occupants. Generally, they approach us and ask us what we're doing, and we'll have a quick word with them. And generally, if they have any issues, they bring them up, and we make a note of them. So that's what that all means. We do at times do formal interviews as well. Next slide, please. And again, a wordy slide. Sorry about that. I talked about a few of these things already. We do use a program called CX Alloy. There are many. McKinstry used something previously called BIM 360 Field. It's really just the point of all that is we use an online collaborative program that's visible to the owner and to all participants in the project. That's a really good way to go about your commissioning in the field, whoever your provider is. Right now, to expand on what Marina has, we have moved upward from 133 to 166 issues. And again, these are all tracked in a CX Alloy, and actually, time permitting, I can show you what that looks like a bit. What we're finding is falling into these major categories. We either are seeing equipment maintenance or repair issues, filters, actuators have gone bad, failed relief systems, generally a damper issue, actually sensor issues, also sequence issues. Equipment is not obeying a sequence. Things are not coming on and off as we expect them, or there's an undocumented activity. actually, sometimes that comes up in a question from someone like Ron on Marina staff, like why is the system responding the way it is? You know, we're expecting it to respond to CFM, for instance, measured at a flow station, but it's doing something else. What's going on? Or an inactive sequence. We've seen at least one of these buildings, no morning warm up is in place. They're starting off with a really cold building. Things like that. We're also seeing inappropriate set points and inappropriate schedules. Again, as I described earlier, looks like it's a little cut off at the bottom, but when we identify an issue, it's not just to say, okay, we see this problem. It's what is the root cause of this problem and how do we correct this problem? For us, that's a complete issue identification, and then we can turn that into a corrective action. And I just wanted to touch on a few other buildings that we've done. I was asked not to name names, so that's why it just says office building. So this was a successful effort in our opinion, 40% energy savings. And basically the main tasks that we completed was energy management system deployment. We installed smart meters. We optimized not only HVAC controls, but also lighting. As is typical, repairs and upgrades to mechanical equipment, operations efficiencies, again, you know, through sequence or set point tuning. And there was also a COVID element, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. We wanted to get this building ready for occupancy. So we actually have a whole separate program that we used to run called Return with Confidence. And we looked at ASHRAE and CDC guidelines to how best posture your building to meet their guidelines. Things like increased airflow and increased outdoor air percentage, increased air changes, and so on. Next slide, please. This was another one, and you see my wonderful technician Emily here at an air handler up on a catwalk. This was a very large industrial fabrication facility in Western Washington. All the bulleted items that we've completed so far, or have recommended so far, excuse me, we calculate will result in $333,000 per year of energy savings. That's very significant. Just to elaborate a little bit, we were actually at another one of their buildings the preceding year in the towards the end of calendar year 2021. Had similar success. We did not do this calculation, however. They invited us back and we got a little bit more, wanted to give them a few more arrows in their quiver to do this yet again, and calculated the energy savings. Also a very successful program. All the while the industrial fabrication was going on below. So that was also a key component, was not to interrupt what they were doing. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to lay out some of the key success factors. I think we've talked about many of these already. Qualified EBCX service provider is a big deal. That's most of us are certified through an organization called the Building Commissioning Association. I am a certified commissioning professional, as I believe Jeremy is as well. They are the gatekeepers of best commissioning practice in our field. So you do want to ensure that your provider has those certifications or something equivalent. I also have the ASHRAE certification as well, and there's actually a third, I think it's called CXA, which a few people have, but not as many. It depends on what kind of programs you're running and what requirements you're meeting. Almost everyone's going to do CCP. That's an ASTM recognized certification. And then, yeah, moving on to the next bullet point, emphasize O&M staff involvement and buy-in. That's a really key item. However, we can do our work without them. Where we really need the involvement, at least, is buy-in from the management. Yes, you can proceed with this project. Yes, you can get into our buildings. Yes, whoever's available on our staff can spend some time with you as needed. And honestly, if we do have an operations person who's available, the more time they can spend with us, the better. That's wonderful. But if they don't have that time, we are adept at going through people's buildings, discovering problems and recommending solutions. So just the buy-in alone is probably the biggest component. Training and documentation is also extremely important. We make all these changes, we make the building better, but if nobody understands them or knows how they work, they're going to go away pretty quickly. So we want to basically document everything we've done and hand that off to the operations staff so they understand any changes that we've made. And that's all documented not only for them, but for if they're getting a grant from our friends at PSE. Then yeah, verification of energy savings. Again, that's typically a grant requirement, whatever vehicle you might be using. And however you want to do that. You can do things as simple as using billings up through some of the things I showed you earlier. It definitely should save energy and solve problems. If it didn't, that's astonishing, because Jeremy can attest to this as well. If you go into somebody's building as a commissioning professional, you're going to find something. And if it's acted upon, it will save money. So financial requirements and implementation commitment before investigation, that's definitely a good thing to have. Nobody wants to do a bunch of work and have the risk of not being paid. And then establish benchmarks and ongoing monitoring and verification. Definitely ongoing communication we find is really the best part of any commissioning process is the people involved. And if we're not talking to the owner and communicating what we're finding and understanding their concerns, we're only doing half the process or less. So very, very important item. I think that's all I had, unless there's one more slide I've forgotten about.
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much. And I appreciate that you mentioned the training and documentation, that pass off phase. So important. I mean, I know from my time in facilities management, how frustrating it is to have a building that was never commissioned. Documentation is sparse. And I just want to point out that this process of going through existing building commissioning can kind of bring things up to speed and provide some of that documentation all in one place, and give that that information, as long as you have a qualified service provider, should be also passing that information along and providing some level of training to your operators. So thanks for sharing that and pointing that out. I do have one question. Where were the smart meters installed in the case study? I think we're talking about the Sumner Bonnie Lake.
Oh, we haven't. No, that was the office building project.
Oh, okay.
Those were installed on all your major utilities, gas, electricity, and water, but also submetered at their HVAC equipment, at their lighting control panel, and I think also plug loads at that building.
Okay, thanks. And you mentioned submetering. I do want to mention that Smart Building Center has, and PSE, we have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks on specifically submetering to meet compliance with clean buildings on campus buildings. And so definitely applicable to K through 12. So I want to go ahead and give our last speaker a chance. Jason Hyatt from PSE, Senior Energy Management Engineer. And Jason's going to talk about some of the programs PSE has specifically to help with funding these efforts. And I want to mention that, even if you're not in PSE's territory, check with your utility, your local utility. Most utilities have similar programs. I know we have a representative from Seattle City Light here on the call. They have a similar program, so feel free to reach out to me if you want to be connected to other utilities that may be outside of, if you're outside of PSE's service area. All right, take it away, Jason.
Great. I get the best spot where I really just got to go through and reference Jeremy and Scott's presentation. So this should be pretty brief. You want to go to the next slide, or to my first slide? Since they were really going to go in deep, I also wanted to kind of bring up some, commissioning adjacent paths to energy efficiency. And unfortunately, you probably won't ever see me present anything without mentioning a little thing about compliance with our clean buildings law. But for those of you that don't know me, I've been with PSC for 17 years now. I manage our commissioning portfolio, which includes tune-up, existing building commissioning, monitoring-based commissioning, and I also work on projects and manage our controls upgrade programs. Next slide. So, and Jeremy gave a good outline of what makes a good cost-effective commissioning project. But I would like to add a few more that we kind of look at as a utility, and most of them are pretty synonymous, but there's just a couple that stand out. Over the years, we've kind of identified that it's really about that 50,000 square foot realm where it starts hitting like a better cost effectiveness number. It's a pretty soft requirement on our end. We do use that with most of our customers, but there's always no building is exactly the same as the next one, and we don't really like to have too many hard rules, because most of the time it really depends on kind of what you're doing in the building. So in that vein, if it's a campus, if you have a campus of buildings and you have some that are under 50,000, it scales really nicely. So you could be making it cost effective for those smaller buildings. Helps with you have larger buildings on the campus. There's also buildings when you have a high energy density, where if you're hitting 50, 60, 100 kBTU per square foot per year, it still might be a good way to go. And I wouldn't let this number be a hard number in your brain that, oh, my building's 48,000, commissioning is never going to work. It really is specific to every building. There's complexity, but the reason we use that number again is for the cost effectiveness, to give the customer a good idea of kind of where that lands. We also look at energy use, which Jeremy mentioned. You have a high, or you're trending upwards over the years. You definitely want to look at energy efficiency, and we consider that a good candidate for commissioning. To put a benchmark there for what is a high EUI, I think that not everyone, a lot of people on this call know exactly what I'm talking about, but for the layperson, I think that's always the question, like, what's high? Like, it's perspective. Generally, how I quantify that to customers is if your EUI is around the average EUI for your type of building, you probably have some potential for savings within your site. And for those that are familiar with the Clean Buildings Law, if your EUI is higher than your target, it's probably a good candidate for commissioning as well. And of course, it's also going to depend on the building. You might have, my building's operating perfectly. My EUI is high because I have old lighting, or I need to put some VFDs in, or some capital improvements. Can also be a good path to go down for cost effective or reaching compliance. We really also look at complexity as a driver. A lot of people ask me kind of what type of buildings work for commissioning. It'd be easier to say which buildings don't. It's really those simple buildings that they don't even need or have building automation systems. They're more single zone systems, like picture warehouse, big open spaces. You just have constant volume systems. Once you start getting into the more complex systems, you have more complex sequencing. There's just a lot more failure points and a lot more opportunities to fine tune your building. When it is a simpler buildings, it's not to say that there are not opportunities in that building. And I have been in plenty of simple buildings that I can offer some good case studies of building savings with those. But for going through that entire investigation through commissioning, you really want to look at the more complex systems. What we look for targets for savings is about a 5% minimum. If it's less than that, there might be other ways to kind of get to where you want. But that's usually the minimum that we're looking at for like a potential energy savings when we're looking at your billing history. Of course, the actual energy savings can be anywhere between that 5% and, I said 18% because I didn't want to, everyone to start giving me a call because I said 25%, but there's definitely those buildings that can reap a lot more rewards. I think the infographic that Scott showed, some that were as high as 25%, depending on what's happening in the building, the size of the building, the complexity. What we've seen in payback across our programs is a 0.7-year payback. And I think Jeremy, you pointed at 2-year payback, and that's what we look for that low cost, low hanging fruit, low no cost measures is a 2-year payback. And then of course, being the utility, my math's a little more fun because I get to add incentives into that. So with incentives, we get to that 0.7 year payback, which is a really great boon and for the customer, of course. Next slide. So like I said, in our portfolio of commissioning programs, we have existing building commissioning, monitoring-based commissioning, and we have our building tune-up. I'm lucky enough, since Scott and Jeremy went into such detail, that I don't have to be the boring utility guy this time. So that's great for me. Usually I'm the one that gets to go down the weeds and deep into these programs, but I'm just going to go kind of over the participation in them and mention, or just kind of go over the incentives that we offer. They are all the incentives are predicated on the type of customer you are a PSC. That's why I have max here in the incentives in parentheses. But so that would be if you're all PSC, you would be looking at the max. If you're an electric, it's a step down. And then if you're gas only and you have another electric, it would be another step down on the incentives. And I recommend, if you're interested, you can always call me and we can discuss it, or look at our on our website, which I'll flash on the screen later. So for existing building commissioning, we have 3 phases, and Jeremy and Scott both went over them. We call it the assessment. They call it, the scoping or investigation. It does have a little bit of the investigation, but like the bigger part of the investigation would be in the implementation. We really consider this assessment kind of the lighter touch to determine, hey, are we going to do this as a project, or is this going to go down another path? That's kind of what we determined during the assessment phase, how we refer to it. But we have a $5,000 guaranteed max for that incentive. If we decide to move forward, then we go into the deep dive, to the commissioning, the implementing of any of the opportunities, verifying, and then of course getting into the training and documentation that comes with commissioning as a whole. In this implementation for existing building commissioning, first thing I noticed when I gave Melissa the slides was that there is a typo. That actually should be 35 cents a square foot for the max, not 15 cents for the implementation for existing building commissioning. One thing to note for how we define existing building commissioning is, and how I explain it to customers that go through the program is, we're really looking at, like, this is more of a manual process. You have boots on the ground, you have people that are actually, changing set points, verifying end to end what's going on with your controls. It's all done predominantly manually. Not to say there's not a lot of automated exercises that happen during the process, but it's a mainly manual process. Once the process is completed, we have a performance period, and this incentive is closed. Wherever you see a performance, the incentive is the same. It's 5 cents per kilowatt hour and 80 cents per therm. So we'll come back after a minimum of 10 months and actually look at what you saved, and we can offer another incentive in addition to the other incentives already awarded. For monitoring-based commissioning, of course, it's a technology-based process, which has gone over, but we also have 3 phases for this. But for this, it's the implementation phase, and then we have actually 2 performance phases. And the reason that we do that is because the monitoring-based commissioning is really an ongoing commissioning process, and we want the customer to be really comfortable with that process of reiterating, identifying or monitoring, identifying, investigating, implementing, verifying, and just continuously going around and around, in perpetuity to maintain those savings and identify any opportunities well into the future. So we really want to have like an ongoing relationship in the short term with the customer, the commissioning agent, to make sure that that process is ingrained. With the tune-up is a very prescriptive approach. Some of you that are in Seattle service territory are probably familiar. It's very parallel to the requirements there. So a prescriptive list of kind of what to look at, and then once you implement all those, we'll come back into a performance incentive for that measure as well, that program as well. That implementation is a little bit different because it kind of scales. So for a max, it's more $5,000 for like each 100,000 square feet. So it can be more than that $5,000. Next slide. And this is what we've been trying to do with our monitoring-based commissioning, is kind of like an a la carte, so that you can use the monitoring-based commissioning standalone, and this is what you want to do for your buildings. But we also have the ability to add monitoring-based commissioning to existing building commissioning, where instead of having that manual approach, you're actually automating a lot of the processes that go along with existing building commissioning. And by doing the automated approach, we can add an additional performance incentive. So for doing that above and beyond process, you can get more dollars from your utility, or me, whoever your utility is, but me. But that also goes for our tune-up. We offer, if you want to say, go through, you want to make sure your building is, dialed in, and then you want to implement a monitoring-based commissioning, we can also group those together so that you can maximize kind of what you get from both of those programs. And also in doing so, you get additional incentives for the tune-up with monitoring-based commissioning. Essentially, you get both of the incentives for both of those programs. So an additional year performance and additional implementation incentives. Excuse me. Next slide. So with that, I mentioned this where we have kind of like the commissioning adjacent, which is our CSIM. And for those that are not familiar, is our commercial strategic energy management program, where in the commissioning program, we're incentivizing the implementation of commissioning, the measures that are identified. And with CSIM, we're really we're investing in a person that is going to be doing those activities that are examples here, looking at your operations, your maintenance, tweaking your set points. And we actually kind of along the process help train that person, and develop that person so that they can have a better understanding of their different systems. There's a 3-year grant for participating in that program. And we expect about a 3% savings on the first year, and then it ramps up to 5% over the next 2 years. This is a very successful, I'm sure there's folks in the audience that are participating. A lot of K-12 and higher ed customers participate in this. Next slide. For the incentives, we have 2 cents a kilowatt hour, 15 cents a therm. We have a target that you should hit, which is that 3.55% savings. If you hit that, you'll be awarded a target incentive. And there's training incentives that are given to that person. Like I said, we want to develop. We have in-house, and we also do trainings. A lot of CSIM participants have BOC training, level 1, level 2, and it's very flexible into how you want to use that training. You have access to data for your energy using our energy consumption software. We also do trainings in-house, and we provide walkthroughs to kind of help you identify and become more familiar with building systems. Very successful program over the years. Next slide, please. And for compliance, I know that a lot of you have probably heard enough of this, so I'm just going to be really brief. And I think these are a few of the questions that I kind of I hear from some of our customers. Well, one, what are you talking about? What is clean building law? For those that are not familiar, we do have a complete clean building accelerator program They do training, they provide guidance, they provide tools to help you understand the law, but also get to where your paperwork's in order and identify if your savings, if you're hitting your savings target, or if you're going to need to dig in to hit your savings targets for the law. There are some that, you know, are maybe they've already done this the paperwork and they're not sure about the hitting the target. And what really helpful is kind of determining which path or which program is if you know where you're at as related to your target. If you need more capital projects implemented, we have incentives for that. If you are in the realm of, you know, gosh darn it, I'm not sure where to start, or I'm not sure exactly what is going on in my building, then commissioning, starting with even Clean Building Accelerator program, but leading into commissioning can help you reach compliance with some of the documentation that you need, but also identify how to get there with your target. And here in the lower left hand, I put some URLs for the different programs that I've mentioned, and also my email at the bottom at PSC if you guys have any questions or that come after this panel and question period. Believe that is it for me.
Great, thank you. So I do have one. It's great to hear about all the good programs that PSC has available, resources, and again, check with your local utility to see what they might be able to provide in terms of grants, incentives, assistance, etc. There is one question about how is it ever an issue to differentiate the savings from the strategic energy management program versus commissioning if a customer is participating in both programs?
We label every kilowatt hour and therm individually. No, I'm just kidding. What we do, because they're both performance and programs, is on your side of the participation, nothing really changes. It is really about how we communicate it on our side of the wall. How you participate in it it's not going to affect. You're going to get the higher incentive for your savings. And if you hit your target through commissioning, then you're still going to hit that incentive, that target incentive. So on your end, it'll be seamless. Like it'll be, you just need to let us know, hey, I have a couple buildings that need to go like a deeper dive, a deeper commissioning, and then we will write you a parallel grant so that you can just continue on the path of CSIM with a couple projects that are participating, or buildings rather, that are participating in commissioning.
Okay. Great, thanks, Jason, and thanks to all of our presenters. I'm going to just now open the time up to for some questions, and I've got folks' contact information here if you want to jot it down for anything we don't get to, or if you want to get into a little deeper analysis pertaining to your building, please reach out. And so this is coming up a lot, and of course, hot on everyone's minds, you know, staffing, training, right? You mentioned you don't necessarily, a couple of you mentioned, you don't necessarily have to have that dedicated staff member that's going to be boots on the ground every step of the way, putting a lot of time into this process. Of course, that's helpful to at least have someone with some knowledge of the building, right? But the commissioning agent should be able to do the heavy lifting. So I think that's helpful because that's a big, you know, concern for small staffs that are understaffed. So, but then what about that continued training? Is the commissioning agent able to impact that ability for continued training? Is it assumed that the owner is just going to pass that information on to new hires? And the person asking this question says they've seen some turnover lately, and they're just wondering if there are any good strategies to keep ongoing training taking place with staff and ongoing potential, you know, even with turnover. I wonder if Marina, if you have any tips on that end.
Yeah, you know, there's a large amount of training that is a component of the program that we've got in place right now. And because we're losing staff, that's a little daunting, but we're taking an approach that, you know, training key personnel in different parts of the systems is going to have the biggest value overall. So, you know, we'll be losing our last HVAC technician later this year to retirement. It would be wonderful if we had applicants, and if you know of any, please send them our way. We'd love to have them. But in the meantime, we have multiple people who are trained in how to schedule buildings, how to check set points, how to make minor changes, you know, minor system overrides when necessary. We document everything. We allow our custodians to log into the system and to look at spaces and see if fans are running, if temperatures are rising or falling, what the different amounts of air might be flowing through the system so that they can write better work orders, which helps us quite a bit when it comes to getting fixes in place. But we're just having to be creative at this point and really relying on increasing our documentation. Perfect world, we'll have a new hire that we can walk through this training with us. And if we don't, then we would invest in some further training for whatever new hires that we might get in the future. In the meantime, like I say, I'm going to be trained, our director will be trained. We have a climate fellow who has become very adept at both of our control systems. And we believe in spreading the knowledge around so that we all have some familiarity and some ability to recognize what a system's trying to tell you. Oops.
Muted myself. All right, here we go. So that is helpful because I think that is the, you know, age-old issue of you got things going well for a while and then you lose people and then nobody knows what's going on or what's happened. Original documentation isn't there or things have changed dramatically. And speaking of things changing, I'd like to address this idea of, you know, often with facility staff being so pressed for time, so much deferred maintenance, just trying to keep the building running without a lot of help and support sometimes. Workarounds happen, right? Workarounds. And I wonder about this idea of buy-in from facility staff. So I think, you know, sometimes there could be some pushback in terms of, well, why do we need these commissioning agents to come in and, you know, are they going to make me look bad because I've just been scrambling around to get something to work in the short term? Are they going to expose some of the issues that we haven't been able to address? You know, is this an
You've been
issue?
listening to our conversations. You know, people get defensive when you start this process. I think it's a natural reaction. We don't like to have our work criticized, and that counts for our HVAC techs and our maintenance technicians. They tend to take things personally. And I remind people over and over, and I'm trying to change the culture to understand, so we all can understand that this is not personal, that we're talking about fallible equipment, about equipment and systems that need to be maintained, need to be adjusted, need to be fine-tuned. It's not a judgment about the work. It's about optimizing the systems so we have the best outcome and we can do the right thing for our constituents. You know, we have to be accountable to our taxpayers. We have to be accountable to our teachers and our students. And so it's not a personal thing. It's about getting the work done. So we're working on changing that culture as a department on how we approach this kind of thing from within. And I think that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, that's kind of pretty much what I was going to say too, is we have gotten pushback. It's usually at the beginning of any of these processes before we can actually sit down with people and kind of go over what we're doing and why we're there, right? Because like Renee was saying, people take pride in their work, right? When you show up and say, hey, why did you do this? They start taking offense like, oh, I don't know what we think that they don't know what they're doing. And that's not the case, right? We understand that a lot of these things that you guys have had to override or go around is just because you don't have the time to find that root cause issue. And you're running from one cold call to another, just putting out fires and keeping the phones from ringing off the hook. So it's nothing personal. We don't judge when we find these things. And the other way to look at it is you audit your books every year, right? So you look at where the money is and where it's gone and who spent it where. Why not look at your buildings and see how those are operating too? Having a second set of eyes on it is never a bad thing. I actually think it's very beneficial to have somebody who's just kind of outside looking in. They can see things a little bit different than when it's right in your face all the time.
Yeah, good point. I appreciate that reassurance. Again, this is a process that can help. It can help identify issues. It can help identify long-term fixes. And in doing so, give staff a little more time to actually focus on some of those deferred maintenance items rather than chasing and having to create workarounds, et cetera. So we talked a little bit about compliance with mandates such as clean buildings, Seattle building tune-up, et cetera. So how can schools leverage some of these mandates in order to get approval to initiate some of this work? Any thoughts there?
Well, I think that I've presented a lot of our programs, and I think usually what I tell customers or inform them is, like every building has kind of a path to get to this compliance, and there's some ambiguity in the law where it doesn't actually ask you or tell you how to get there. So there's going to be customers that are able to get there through strictly capital investments in doing upgrades, but there's going to be customers that need attention, need training, need assistance to really understand what's being asked of them. And that's why I brought up the CBA program, because it is a great resource for those that don't know how to start. And that also can help you determine what path is best served for you. And I'm not just speaking for PSC, like all the utilities have a litany of incentives that can help you along each one of these paths, where it is strictly just getting the documentation and you're good to go, telling you how to do that. If you have operational and maintenance that have just gone untouched for many years, like we've expressed here, like commissioning or some sort of commissioning adjacent project or program might be optimal for you. Or if you have capital investments that you need to kind of get done in the interim, we're also here to help you kind of down that path. So it's really important to really start out as quickly as possible, identify where you are with your target. If it's just paperwork, you're in a good place. But if you're above target, you need to figure out what that path is and just start talking to your utility representatives and see how much money they will help you invest in getting to that target and within compliance.
Right. Yeah. And I want to point out that there are, outside of utility incentives, there may be other options as well, other grant funding. I know Department of Commerce is rolling out some grants to help with this process. I know for as well as federal, there's money coming down from the recent IRA Act and other funding opportunities. And then you also have perhaps the leverage of, this is a requirement now, these laws for performance. So that maybe that gives you a little more clout with your school boards and in passing these levies. Go ahead, Marina.
I was just gonna say, I love PSC. We have a really good relationship. And I was really fortunate to be able to be have us participate in the Climate Fellow program. And the person that we have as a Climate Fellow is an incredible data analyst. And so it is really valuable to be able to not only crunch the data about, what our buildings are doing for consumption, but also what the costs might be for compliance or non-compliance, and putting together a business case for how you address compliance with clean buildings. And again, it was an incredible opportunity to be able to get this person with the partnership of PSE, and it's been an invaluable experience for us.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. I don't see any other questions in the questions pane, and we are at time. So I'm going to go ahead and once again, thank you, all of our panelists. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge, experience, expertise today. I think it's really valuable. And I will just for a moment put that screen back up with your contact info and stay on for just a moment if folks want to jot that down. But we'll let you all go, get back to your day. And thanks again for joining us. We'll send out the recording and watch for future offerings from the Smart Building Center. And have a good day, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.